My name's Lauren Dovey. I run the Better Business for All project for the county, for Hertfordshire County Council. Also work with all the district borough councils across Hertfordshire. So we really work to make regulations simpler and work better for businesses in the county. So we'll tell you a bit more about that at the end and the toolkit we've created for businesses. So this is the 5th webinar in the series, and today it's focusing on step 3 of the government's roadmap to recovery. Just to let you know, I think you've already had an email let you know anyway, but the webinar will be recorded, and we can also share the slides after, so you'll be able to watch it back and have the presentation as well. So the format of today, we've got until about 4 o'clock. So the first part of the session will be a presentation for about 15 to 20 minutes. And then we'll go into our panel of experts Q&A session. Although we've got the Q&A session at the end, if anyone has any questions throughout, then please feel free just to drop them in the chat box, and then I can get to those when we get to the Q&A part of the session. And if you don't have to put in the chat box, if you'd rather ask the question yourself when we get to that part, then also you can do that as well. So whichever way you'd like to do it, but any questions you have, then you've got an expert panel of 5 people here today, so make the most of it. So if I hand over now to Paul Thomas-Jones for the presentation. So Paul is the Service Manager for Environmental Health at East Herts District Council. So Paul, over to you.
Thank you. So we're going to have a quick look through the main changes that come around as part of the government's roadmap. So, I mean, this might be a bit small, but it's not important to read at this moment. So just to recap then, back in February, the government announced its roadmap out of lockdown. They put it into 4 steps, which were about 5 weeks apart, to judge the impact on the spread of the virus through this period. The government announced on Monday that we are on track to move into step 3 on Monday coming, which is really good news. So we need to make sure we do that safely and carefully. There will be another webinar, I'm led to believe, in June that will cover the step 4 transition as well. So the main changes from Monday are the majority of indoor and remaining outdoor economy will reopen. Indoor hospitality will be allowed for the first time for a while. We will have cinemas, museums and children's play areas be reopening. Indoor sport. We can mix with up to 6 people indoors or 2 households indoors. And we can mix with up to 30 people outdoors. I'll come back onto those in a minute. Accommodation like hotels and stuff can then open for tourism rather than just essential trade. And there's more sort of socially distanced events allowed indoors and outdoors. So the main changes for the hospitality industry are around the eating indoors and outdoors. As pre-lockdown, if you sell alcohol, that has to be a table service. If you sell alcohol, it doesn't matter whether that customer's ordering it or not. That means the customer must be seated throughout. When they order, they receive the food and they eat and drink it. Obviously, they can move around for toilets and stuff like that. And I think there's an exemption if you've got poor signal and you can't take payment outside. If you're not serving alcohol, then your customers can order and collect food from a counter. But again, same as above, when they are having food and drink, they must be seated. With regards to groups, it's a group of 6 people, so that could be 6 different households, or 2 households together, which could be more than 6 people, and that can be linked households. So if you've got perhaps an elderly person who has formed what was called bubbles before with a family, then that would count as 1 household. There are exemptions for the weddings. So weddings can take place up to 30 people. They can have the wedding breakfast inside. Obviously, it's, as proprietors, You are responsible for making sure the group sizes are correct, that the household makeup are correct, and that the use of the indoor and outdoor areas are correct. If we go back in time to 2006, there was a smoke-free legislation that introduced the concept of enclosed and substantially enclosed. This new legislation for coronavirus has taken that and used that definition to decide what's indoors and what's outdoors. Unfortunately, with the diagrams, they are a lovely smoking shelter, but they don't necessarily reflect the weird and wonderful bits that the hospitality industry have access to, such as pods, sheds, marquees, and various other bits. So when you're looking at that, if it's substantially enclosed, which means it's got a roof and more than 50%, more than half of it has got a side, then that's counted as indoors. So even if it's in your garden and you've got pods and stuff like that, that would be indoors, and therefore you could only have up to 6 people mixing, or you can have 2 households. If it's more than 50% open, then that would be counted as outdoors. So there's some guidance on that in the BBfA Trade and Safety Toolkit, which is linked at the end of this. But this, what I would say from step 2, moving into step 2, a lot of businesses have struggled with this. So always, you know, some of these are large amounts of money that you can be buying. So please talk to someone like your environmental health team or your local team to make sure that what you're doing is considered right. Otherwise, you're potentially wasting a lot of money. So when you're looking at running your business, consider things such as noise and nuisance to neighbouring premises. You've got a lot of people outside in your garden perhaps now. You want to discourage dancing and singing and shouting. How are you going to police any shelters you've got that are in the garden? How are you going to make sure the customers are doing it right, using them right, not mixing and stuff? You're going to inevitably have some sort of queuing system. So how's that going to be managed? How are you going to do that socially distancing? You are allowed music, live entertainment, but the customers must be seated. Make sure that when you're looking at how many tables that you can get in there, you are considering distance between tables, considering your fire exits. Have you got too many people in that area for that? And again, seek some professional advice if you've got concerns. How are you going to manage face coverings and the requirement for staff to staff and customers to wear them? And there's also there's been a change with regards to the collection of contact details, which we'll have a look at shortly. So events, they are more of them are allowed to take place now. Live performances, etc. Again, look at the number that you can safely accommodate with social distancing measures or set COVID safe measures in place. Is it going to be financially viable for you? There's lots of different bits there to balance up. There are no exemptions for the consuming of drinks, so it's just exactly the same as a restaurant or other hospitality, that the people need to be seated while consuming them. The Gov website has, these links will be circulated later. The Gov website has lots of guidance for different sectors. These are just 3 of them that might be a particular use. So if you've got events running, there's different bits about ticketing, organising live performances and sporting events. So it's worth having a look on the Gov website to see what might be useful for you. If you are having an event, I would suggest contacting your safety advisory group at your local council. That brings together partners such as the police, fire, road safety and environmental health, who can then all offer you advice on how to operate safely before the event, and therefore you will know ahead of time what you need to do and hopefully factor that in, and it'll be more successful for you. All of your events, you need to make sure that they are covered by a COVID-19 specific risk assessment. You will have done these beforehand. These shouldn't be new. These would have done pre-lockdown, but you should revisit them, revise them, make sure they're still accurate. You haven't changed anything. You've updated it all. I would suggest looking at your fire safety risk assessments, as well as your general risk assessments as well, because things will have changed to accommodate the COVID's secure measures. There's lots of information out there, whether it's from the industry or the Gov website, or indeed the HeartSLEP website. Some staff have been furloughed for a long time, so you might need to consider training, refresher training, looking at staff bubbles maybe, so that if anything does happen, you don't lose and someone has to isolate, you don't lose your whole team in one go. Again, some of your premises may have been closed for a long time, so it's worth, particularly with food premises, checking for pests, any sign of that they've gained entry. Is all your equipment working correctly? Have you gone through and serviced that? Does it all operate? One of the things we found from going into stage 2, there's been an increase nationally of cases of Legionella. So you really need to revisit your Legionella risk assessments. People forget that water systems have been stagnant for a long time, and that can grow. So there is lots of guidance on the HSE website, but Chris, who's on the call today, I believe, has lots of knowledge on the subject. So if you've got any questions for him, please feel free to ask. When you're looking at social distancing, as well as obviously the customers, I'm thinking of your staff here. So what happens with things like toilet breaks, lunch breaks, how you sort of minimizing the risk of spread within your organisation. And as well as just doing the enhanced cleaning, make sure you've got plenty of supplies to facilitate that. Ventilation is a really big part, so where you can, make sure you've got your windows open to disperse any virus that may be there. We've talked about face coverings, we've talked about queuing systems. Testing, I think, unless you've already signed up for it now, the National Programme for Employers, has closed now, so you can't register for that. But any adult in the UK is entitled to the LFT, the lateral flow tests. So you can get your employees to sign up for that. That's 2 tests they can do per week, which indicates whether they've got the virus, if they're asymptomatic, which means they're not showing any signs. It's a really easy process. You get like for want of a better wording, a giant cotton bug, wipe it on the back of your throat, wipe it up your nose, mix it with a solution, and you just wait for some lines to appear. It's really easy to do, and they're available from the Gov website as well as some pharmacies and stuff like that. It's inevitable there will be outbreaks. That's nothing to be overly concerned about if you get one, but it is really important that you treat it correctly. So there is some information on the LEP website which will guide you through who to contact and how to contact them and when. But in essence, it's if there is an outbreak associated with your premises, whether it's a member of staff or a member of your customers and stuff, you really do need to contact your environmental health team so that we can get there and help isolate people that need to isolate and get them tested, and allow you to kind of carry on trading without any further risk to the public. Test and trace, this has changed since we were last open. So over lockdown, the legislation changed. Now every member of every member of the party who is over 16 needs to sign in and give their details. Pre-lockdown, it was just you could have one member of a group and that was sufficient, but now it's everyone. Within the hospitality, if they refuse to give you your details, if they refuse to give their details even, then you should be refusing entry to them. You should be keeping a record of your staff who are working, their sort of shift patterns. If, for example, you're in a hairdresser's, you should record if they only have, the customer only has contact with one member of staff, then that's worth recording. Again, if there was an outbreak and we can limit the number of people that need to self-isolate or get tested, then that's better for you in terms of running your business. With regard to the keeping the contact details, you need to keep them for 21 days. You need to comply with the data protection legislation, the GDPR. So they need to be kept securely throughout. If there is an outbreak, you need to provide those details to the track and trace service, and you need to display the official NHS QR code. Anyone that registered pre-lockdown will have been contacted with the new poster. If not, you can use that web link to create your own poster. As well as having that, you need a manual system for those customers that don't have access to a smartphone to log in and out. Something to consider when you're looking at your risk assessments is how will staff who aren't vaccinated, who can't, are exempt from wearing face coverings or not testing, how will that impact on your risk assessments? I would suggest, you need to comply with the employment law that's out there, and there's some links later on to some reputable sources there for information. But one of the key bits is around communication with your staff. And as I said earlier, a lot of staff have been furloughed, so there's a lot of sort of well-being issues and changing. So the Hearts Growth Hub has got a well-being programme that's worth having a look at there. There are different types of testing available. Details of that are on the Hearts website, Hearts County Council website. ACAS have produced 2 guidance there, one on long COVID and how to deal with that. So people with long COVID might have chronic fatigue or other symptoms that you need to consider. And also around asking employees to have vaccines and or not. So we need to, when we're looking at COVID, for whatever business you're running, it's not just one control that you need to put in place. There's lots of different controls, and I'm sure someone like Jim McManus, Director of Public Health, will at this stage bring out a nice cheese diagram and all the holes lining up and stuff like that. And those that have had presentations are probably smiling now and know what I mean. But it's not just one thing. So all these things need to be done together. We've got social distancing, hygiene, hand hygiene, personal hygiene, cleaning, the ventilation, looking at whether or not your business should be operating within fixed teams, so that if one member of that team become unwell, you're reducing the number of staff that are impacted. Screens and barriers might be appropriate, PPE. All of that sort of information is considered in the sector specific guides that are on the Gov website. So again, there's the website, it's worth having a look. And they can be quite lengthy, but there's a really handy section at the top called, I think it's at the top, that's called What's Changed. And that will detail what changes have happened on what date. So you don't have to read the whole thing every time there's an update. You can just go straight to that section. The toolkit that I mentioned earlier is available on the Hearts-Let website. There's a website address there. These will be circulated afterwards. And the next session is on staff safety and wellbeing, which is on the 20th of May, and details of booking are on the Hearts Chamber website. And I think I did that within 15 minutes. Over to Lauren.
You did well. I think you almost stuck to the exact timing.
I come up for breath now.
Yeah. Thank you. That was great. So that was a kind of run through of all the key considerations for different types of businesses at this time. I know, having a look at the list of who we've got here today, that we've got some real different sectors and businesses with premises, without premises, food businesses. So if you have any specific questions, then for your sector, that's what we have the Q&A panel for. So please do ask anything specific. So I will mention this again later, but just to note, we really briefly included employee safety and wellbeing on this webinar, but the one on the 20th is all around that. So we have employment law solicitors there, we have the Growth Hub there again to talk through more detail about their project. And so that will really be the chance to ask anything around kind of issues with staff coming back and concerns and how it affects your risk assessment, employment law, all that kind of thing. So make sure you sign up for that one. So if I introduce our panel, I will go around my screen and just ask you to introduce yourself and just a really brief 30 seconds, a minute of how you're working with businesses at this time. And then we can move on to some questions. So you can probably go into a bit more detail at that point as well. So if I just start from the top of my screen with Nathan March.
Hi, I'm Nathan March. I work for the Cornwall Borough Council in licensing. So we're responsible for licensing pubs and bars and events. And also we do street trading and currently pavement licensing as well. So where cafes want to have tables and chairs outside. And in addition to that, taxis as well, which relates to the hospitality industry as well. As normal, we're responsible for ensuring that people are complying with any conditions of their licenses, and that hasn't changed despite the fact there's been the challenges with COVID. But we're also trying to support the businesses to make sure that they can make use of all of the licenses that are available. So advice as much as possible, and in line with what the government are asking, really just trying to approach things as reasonably as possible, but also bearing in mind that local residents are also our customers. So as much harmony as possible between the businesses reopening and the local residents who have grown very used to it being quiet, almost silent. So trying to find the right balance for that, but bearing in mind we know that the businesses have had an extremely difficult time of it over the last year, 18 months.
Thanks, Nathan. So if I go to Chris Troy next, so obviously Paul's already heard from Paul and he's environmental health, so Chris Troy is also environmental health.
Yeah, my name's Chris Troy, and I'm one of the environmental health officers at St Albans Council. So in normal circumstances, we're responsible for ensuring regulation of food and health and safety on the district, and also infectious disease control as well. Obviously, in the last year, our roles have changed significantly, and certainly my role has mainly been to do with COVID-19, dealing with issues to do with the pandemic, and that's a mixture of helping businesses, giving people advice. There's obviously enforcement as well for those businesses that refuse to comply with the requirements. And of course, it's infection control as well. So obviously we have had outbreaks. So it's kind of dealing with kind of the different types of settings that we have. Mainly we deal with workplace settings. So it's about kind of trying to work out where infection has taken place, contact tracing, and obviously trying to sort of bring any outbreak, obviously to end that. And going forward, obviously, I think we'll be around for a while, kind of trying to give advice to businesses, to try and encourage them to sort of do not just the basic requirements as required in the legislation or even the government guidance, but to try to sort of encourage them to look at risk assessments and try to sort of do things which are kind of over and above the basic level, because that is the way that you stop infection. And as Paul, I think, mentioned earlier, it's not just one particular control, it's a number of controls. It's about actually trying to break that chain of infection. So, as Paul mentioned, social distancing, cleaning, the whole issue around ventilation, infection control, all these things, they come into their own, and that's the whole purpose is to prevent that chain of infection. So, and I'm happy to answer any questions on that.
Thanks, Chris. If I come to you next, Lisa.
Good Good afternoon, I'm Lisa Armstrong from Hertfordshire Growth Hub. So the Growth Hub is delivered on behalf of Hertfordshire Local Enterprise Partnership, and we've been working very closely with businesses throughout the pandemic to help them navigate the support that's out there for them, keep on track of any of the government grants and schemes, as well as providing support through numerous programmes that we have, including our Get Going To programme, the Volunteer Business Support programme, and also our newer programme that you'll hear more about today, the Wellbeing and Resilience programme that we've developed in partnership with Hertfordshire County Council. So we work very closely with a lot of the partners on the panel today to make sure that we're helping businesses to respond to the pandemic and to adapt their businesses and to come out the other side stronger. Thank you.
Thanks, Lisa. And Lucy. You're muted, Lucy.
Apologies for that. I'm Lucy Cowell from Hertfordshire Fire and Rescue. I'm a fire safety regulator, and our aim at the moment is to primarily support businesses in maintaining fire safety, especially along with the new arrangements that premises are having to put into place for COVID secure measures, and yeah, advise on that. So that's why I'm here today.
Right, thank you, Lucy. So we do actually have some questions that businesses have sent in, things we've collected over the last week or so. But before I come to those, has anyone got any questions they'd like to ask? If you have, you can raise your hand, and then I'm not sure if I can see everyone though. I can only see the pinned people. If anyone's got a question, just unmute yourself and ask it. Is it Raphael?
Yes, hello, nice to meet you all from Aubrey Park Hotel. Also really looking forward to reopening on Monday. But I think I've got a question. It's around the breakfast service. Obviously, we know that we cannot, we have to do table service for the bar and the restaurant when we serve alcohol. But given that during breakfast we don't serve alcohol, is it okay for us to provide like a buffet where the guests will go into the counter, they will see the food, the chef will plate it for them, and then the guests will take it to their table. So they're not going to help themselves. We're going to serve it for them, but they're going to tell us what they want to choose from, because that will help us a lot over the weekends when we have more guests. But I don't know if that's something that we have to do, or we have to do it all, take the order and the food even on breakfast service.
Chris or Paul, does one of you want to take that one?
I think it may be just table service on that, unless I'm mistaken. I don't see any exemptions in the regulations for that. I'm sorry to say.
Even though we're not serving alcohol at that time?
I think it's because your premises is selling alcohol. It doesn't look at different times of the day in the legislation. It just looks at your premises as a whole.
Okay, that's good. Yeah, thank you very much. It's worth trying.
Yeah, and we understand how confusing it all is, because yeah, it's all to do with the premises being licensed, isn't it? And yeah, so only really a cafe that people can order from a counter, but it does all get so confusing. Is anything from a licensing perspective, Nathan, that you think is useful to mention for hotels with restaurants and bars?
No, to be honest, that sort of covers it really. I think it doesn't matter whether you're a bar or a hotel or whatever. Obviously, the alcohol implications are there, but even without the alcohol, they've still got those restrictions in place, which makes it a little bit more challenging.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? I can't actually see hands, so Alison or someone might have to tell me, because I can only see the pinned people in front of me. None at the moment?
Can't see any at the moment.
Okay, shall we go to one of the ones we've had sent in, and then see if anyone's got any after that. So coming back to the kind of theme around staff safety, well-being, there's been quite a few small businesses ask if they don't have their own HR team or HR manager, and that there's a lot they need to consider in terms of potential new policies or developing policies, or just thinking about how they best support staff and keep their business safe at this time. And is there any support around that? So I think the Growth Hub might be able to answer that one.
Sure. Thanks, Lauren. Yes, I mean, there's a lot of practical and legal matters for businesses to consider around that. And we're able to help businesses through our growth account managers and also through our wellbeing advisors to really think about some of those considerations and some of the policies that you may need to update. And of course, a lot of the ones that people are thinking about will be kind of sick leave, remote working, home working policies, flexible working policies and areas like that, and certainly there will be some adjustments needed to be made of those or to be reviewed. So certainly we can support businesses in thinking about what policies they do need to look at, and also being able to help them and think about what those adjustments might be. One thing that I would also say to any businesses out there is also one of the areas that we do speak to businesses about is, first of all, thinking about whether you're a member of any trade associations or bodies or membership organisations where you may have some HR and legal advice included in some of those packages. So do always think about that as well, and we often discuss that with businesses because you may be able to tap into some of those kind of membership programs that offer that. Alternatively, we work very closely with partners and also national organisations, so we are able to provide guidance through the likes of CRPD and ACAS, but also work very closely with the private sector in terms of getting you, if you do need specific legal advice, although we don't provide it ourselves, we can make that connection to legal advice in the county with different solicitors and providers, and actually we're hoping that there may be some provision for some support on that shortly, so do watch this space, and we'll see if hopefully that will become available. But also, through our wellbeing programme, as well as thinking about those policies and procedures and things like that, the wellbeing team are able to sit down and talk to businesses about how to really communicate effectively with their employees, because I think that's at the core of a lot of the concerns that businesses have at the moment, is that consultation at every stage and really understanding what people's concerns are. And certainly we're seeing that a lot of people who've been furloughed or have got quite used to remote working, their anxieties about coming back into the workplace are very real. So when things do change and the government advice changes for a lot of businesses that haven't been back in until June, we know that there's going to be quite a lot of employers that need to address that. And certainly the mood seems to be looking at hybrid working models as well, and I think people will need to think about that in response to their policies, but at the Growth Hub that's something that we'll be able to assist them with.
Right, thank you, Lisa. That was really useful to understand more about that scheme, and just for businesses to know, because I know a lot of businesses have been speaking to environmental health teams about their risk assessments, and then when it comes to kind of subject of supporting employees and things, it's good for them to know there is another place they can go, that support is out there. So yeah, any Hertfordshire business can contact Hertfordshire Growth Hub for any support around that.
Sorry, Lauren, and just one thing to say that I didn't say there, another big area that we do, we're really keen to get across is that, a lot of individuals may not, want to speak to their employers around specific anxieties that we do have, and what we have got is a list of organisations in the county and nationally that people can speak to, and we're happy to share that with employers and businesses out there so that they can get the support that their employees might need around difficult kind of well-being and mental health issues and concerns that they might have. So do have a chat and look on our website, and I'll share a link in the chat as well for people just in terms of where they can find that.
Great, thank you. Yeah, it's really useful to know, because it is one of those things, isn't it? Not every employee wants to speak to their employer. And actually employers can then be proactive and let their employees know if they do want to chat with someone anonymously that, provide that support as well. So that's great, thank you. So we've got a question in the chat box for Lucy. Do you have any advice on how to safely run emergency drills during the pandemic?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, isn't it? And in the early days of COVID, that was something that that came up. You need to make sure that your staff know what they are doing in an emergency situation, and it very much depends on the premises and on your staff. You've got to be confident that they know what they need to do in an emergency situation, because if there is a fire, you need to ensure everyone's got out. And I think probably the pandemic will go to the back of people's minds for those in that emergency time. You would need to consider your staff, think about how you can possibly, you know, talking through even what you would do in an emergency situation. It was a case of you risk assessing and being sure that your staff know what to do in that time. So whether you carry out drills, if you've got staff in pods and you do that with them in their working groups, you know, we talked about having them in their I can't remember what the word was, Lauren, that we used earlier,
in their staff bubbles.
In their bubbles, if you've got staff bubbles, maybe doing it with those staff bubbles, but just make sure that everybody knows that, and they know those, they know where the meeting point is in an emergency situation, and the procedures to be followed. Really, it is difficult and it is challenging for businesses. We certainly get that, but you know, your fire safety arrangements need to be in place. And that does include them being aware of what to do in an evacuation drill. And the point of that is, of evacuation drills, is so that they are confident what to do when, you know, when you're in that panic situation.
Thank you, Lucy. Okay, we've got another question around serviced offices. So service offices have to provide track and trace QR codes into a shared building. Is it up to the individual business? Okay, so I think we've had questions similar to this for community centres as well. As you're a business that requires members of staff in a serviced office due to essential business. Okay, so like a mixed use building of serviced offices, we've got lots of different businesses and obviously a landlord of that premises.
I think the answer is that the different businesses would have to provide track and trace. Each individual business would have to provide that QR code log. Yeah,
I would say, I mean, obviously offices themselves don't need the QR code per se, the same as hospitality. The other thing to think about is it's about the spread of it increases with the frequency of how customers or people are together, etc. So I guess the principle, like Chris said, individual offices or individual businesses within a larger premises, the person will spend more time within them rather than in the corridor going to and from them and stuff like that. So yeah, I agree with Chris. It's got to be the individual businesses.
I think on the sector guidance for offices, I think it goes into some amount of detail. I'm not sure if you had a look at that guidance, but I think it does kind of set out what the responsibilities are. And because I think we've had questions before on should individual businesses in a multi-use building have their own risk assessment, and the answer is always yes, but actually as a landlord of a whole premises, that there should also be a risk assessment of, you know, the whole premises as well. So it's always good practice for each individual businesses to know what, you know, the other risk assessments are and what the risk assessment the whole, like, in the kind of, you know, common areas and things. So there's that communication between like tenants and landlords, as it were.
Yes, I mean, there's an actual duty, Health and Safety at Work Act to work. The landlords should be working with the businesses, sharing health and safety information. So this would fall under that as well. But certainly, when you're looking at risk assessments, it's going to be the people that are in control of the buildings, people that are in control of the actual businesses themselves. In a way, there'll be separate risk assessments, but need to share information. Yeah,
definitely. It's about that communication, isn't it? With so many of these things, it's about communicating with staff, and if you're in a shared office space, communicating with the other businesses, and just, yeah, if everyone kind of communicates and shares the information as much as possible, then that's the way to keep it the most safe. Okay, so Lisa's just shared the details of the Growth Hub's Wellbeing and Resilience Programme in the chat. Thank you for that. Jeanette's just put in the chat. You remind everyone, as we start heading to indoor mixing, one of the main control measures is ventilation. So yeah, whether that's warehouses, hospitality, or offices. So Chris or Paul, do you want to, in fact, that's quite a good one to think about, shared offices and other shared spaces and ventilation. Do you want to mention anything on that?
I'm happy to speak about ventilation, just because I've been with a couple of issues. I do with an outbreak where we think ventilation may have caused spread of an outbreak. So there's actually some quite good guidance from Chartered Institute of Ventilation Engineers. Maybe we could share that maybe afterwards somehow. But it's very interesting how ventilation kind of can prevent infection, but can cause it, which is the interesting thing. So certainly dilution of air is really important, and that will prevent, you know, sort of like the numbers of particles kind of building up to a point where it could be an effective dose. So ventilation has a key role there, but certainly if it's managed wrongly, it can kind of cause problems as well. There's been a few instances where ventilation has actually caused further spread over, say, 2 meters. In one instance, it was 10, 11 meters, where there was a study which is in China, and they actually kind of looked at this in an outbreak. And basically, it's just because of the flow of air. People that were actually sitting right next to the people that had actually had COVID, index cases, didn't get it, but the people kind of on the other side of the room did. So yeah, ventilation is quite critical. And the government is looking at some pilot kind of research into use of these air cleaners. So I happen to know the government, the HSC, is looking at some stuff around using air filtration units, so mobile units, which employ HEPA filters, but also UV. And I know this is something which is being looked at, and it's something which I think keep an eye on that, because it might be something where, for example, if you feel in a premises you haven't got enough air changes, ideally you should be having at least between 3 and 8 air changes in most types of kind of hospitality settings. But with COVID-19, we tried to sort of like encourage kind of the upper end of that, if you like. But certainly if there are some issues with the ventilation, then maybe looking at some of these mobile kind of air cleaning units might be something to look at. So definitely, again, I haven't got any information around this, but I do know that there's some interest in it from government to see how that can facilitate, you know, good air. But the key thing is opening windows. I mean, in type of hospitality setting, particularly, for example, here in St Albans, where we've got very old premises, old pubs, particularly, where we have low ceilings, kind of, you know, very sort of restricted areas, then it's really important to open windows. Ideally as well, although we've got to be a bit careful with this, and depending whether it's a food premises or not, but again, where possible, open even toilet doors, where there's obviously no privacy issues. But we have to be a bit careful with that, because obviously you don't want smells coming into premises, and particularly when we enforce food you know, restaurants, and we enforce food hygiene in those restaurants, and you still need to keep things like ventilated lobbies and keep doors shut there. But in other settings, then we would encourage, you know, toilet doors to be opened, and of course definitely opening windows in toilets as well. It's a key area.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Chris. Just in a similar subject that we've had questions on, that's something that potentially isn't always thought about, that was mentioned in the presentation, is the risk of Legionellas as well. So I think a lot of people associate that with, you know, spas and those types of businesses, but actually it's come to light that there's been other cases, and, you know, if a business has a water system, then there's a potential risk, isn't there? Yeah.
So with Legionellas, definitely it's something where obviously we've got possibility of stagnant systems being in place, you know, whilst a number of premises have been closed. I mean, we'd really encourage people to, depends on the size of the business, but certainly in smaller premises, we really would expect all the systems to be run for, you know, well, I would do it for about 10 minutes, run all systems through, just make sure that it's all properly flushed through. May even choose to disinfect your water tanks, possibly, but certainly in larger premises, you do have to have a proper recommissioning procedure, which will probably mean, you know, proper disinfection of various bits and pieces. But certainly just be very careful, because like Legionella, perhaps I should explain, Legionella, which I saw probably quite a few of you know, is just a bacteria, but it's found in water systems. The problem comes when the water gets stagnant, then basically it can multiply. And where there's a risk of aerosol, so for example, jet washes, for example, is a classic one, nebulizers, humidifying units in restaurants, things like water features, even fountains, not so much outdoor, depending what the temperatures are like outside, but certainly inside they can be a problem. But things like irrigation systems as well. So a lot of pubs have kind of flower boxes and things like that. You know, there's sources of sprays there, but also, you know, things like greenhouses can be an issue as well, where there's automatic systems. So all these things where there's a risk of aerosol need to be very careful. So yes, definitely all about flushing, possible disinfection. Lots of guidance on that. There's HSC, Health and Safety Executive, it's L8 Code of Practice on Legionella control. Yes, I would encourage people to perhaps look at that. But again, that should be part of your risk assessment as well, perhaps looking at those things. And it's that's to do with health and safety, but it's the whole package. You know, we don't want, you know, we're dealing with COVID-19, but as Paul mentioned earlier, there's a number of other things we need to look at to do with like fire safety, Legionella, and others, and things like outside where you kind of got tripping hazards where people are using sort of temporary structures outside. These sorts of things need to be kind of looked at as well.
Yeah, I think that's a really key point, isn't it? There's so much of businesses to remember at the moment with all the COVID-19 regulations and guidance, but actually you need to not let the other stuff fall to the wayside, all the other health and safety measures and fire safety. That's why we want fire safety to be part of these events, because it's things that are just as important, and everything's just as important as each other, and it's, you know, a lot to think about. But that's why we have these people that are here to support you. So we've had a few questions around the kind of licensing hospitality, kind of questions around the difference between events and restaurant bar areas. So this one will probably be for you, Nathan. So it was around, can events be held in a separate function room if it was a restaurant, bar, hotel, if you still got other customers using the normal eating, drinking space, and how they kind of categorize an event where they need a license as opposed to just having a live performance, for example, in a pub. Quite a lot.
So my understanding at the moment is that you can have an event of up to 30 people, but if you're using your premises for that, then you can't have other customers there at the same time. A big challenge with that would be like the hotel industry, I guess, and exactly how that would work if you've got large function rooms which are completely separate to your main premises. And unfortunately, I haven't got a great answer for that at the moment. I think the best advice is probably to speak to your local authority if that's likely to be you. In relation to music, the big challenge at the moment, I think, is you can have live music that is licensable, so entertaining, but you need to make sure that you keep your customers sitting down whilst they're eating and drinking, and that's doesn't tend to be the way that those sorts of events work. If you are thinking about music just as sort of background entertainment, then that's not licensable, so that's not a problem. And that's probably the sort of level we'd expect. I understand that sort of other risks in relation to live and recorded music where it's provided for entertainment is that additional risk in relation to transferring of virus because of people speaking louder or singing or what have you. And I guess the environmental health colleagues here would be able to say more on that if anyone was interested. And then finally, your outdoor events, like the large scale outdoor events, my understanding at the moment is that those will be able to take place from the 17th of May. You'd have to have your risk assessments in place to ensure that they can take place safely. And obviously, you've still got that restriction in terms of people having to be seated if they're eating and drinking. So it's not going to be like festivals that you've seen in the past. So it is going to be a bit different if people look to go forward with that. And massively important to have acceptable risk assessments in place for those. And I know there was, that guidance that came up earlier during Paul's presentation around making sure that events are pre-ticketed and what have you. And obviously that's a massive control measure in terms of ensuring that you don't have any issues when you're running those sorts of events. But I think that the key thing is to speak to your local authorities. Certainly from the Quorum's point of view, we've been working very much between ourselves and environmental health and occasionally other departments as well, like planning, to kind of get the best answers we can in relation to specific issues that come up, because the regulations and the guidance is one thing, but there's always something slightly different about other people's events that are taking place. So I would just really encourage people to speak to the local authority, and we'll do our best to give you the best answer that we can.
Thanks, Nathan. I think that's the one of the key messages from these events is always speak to your local authority. They're there to help you, and also things are changing so often, so we're always trying to keep up to date with it. So if you're not sure, you're confused, then you can speak to your environmental health, your licensing teams. If there's anything else you need support with, you can speak with the Hertfordshire Growth Hub. So yeah, just get in touch with anything you're not sure about. So I've got one more question with offices. Can the employer make testing mandatory as a duty of care to staff? So this is a really interesting one. I think that one that does keep coming up again and again. I don't know if anyone wants to give kind of their view on this one.
I think that's probably one for one of your other sessions in relation to employment law and what have you, because it's, I mean, one thing I can say is certainly from a local authority point of view, this is the sort of issue that we're facing constantly at the moment, not specifically in relation to testing and whether you do it or not, but there's so many questions that arise where you can see the pros and cons either side, and it's very difficult to get an exact answer to those. So at the moment, from a licensing perspective, some of our taxi drivers are asking us about whether they can refuse to take people who won't wear a mask. Yeah, there are exemptions to having to wear a mask, but taxi drivers are required by law really to take fares. And so in a normal time, if they were refusing that, we would have a significant issue with that. We'd still have to carry out investigations now, but we would certainly be considering the impact of the fact that this virus is around and the health and safety aspect of that, and if it's reasonable for those taxi drivers to refuse fares. But bearing in mind, again, that taxi drivers also transport around vulnerable individuals, and we wouldn't want to see those individuals being left stranded as a result of situations like that. So I know it's not really answering the question that's been asked, but unfortunately it's not unusual for us to be in a situation where it's very difficult to give an appropriate answer, and I think that's probably why that would be ideal for an employment law solicitor, really.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Nathan. So yeah, in answer to that, Jax, the webinar on the 20th, we have got employment law solicitor there, so they will be covering this side of things. I think we've had a number of conversations with them over the last couple of weeks, because you've got employment law on one side, which, you know, you can't force employees to do anything. The black and white answer would be no, you can't force your employees to do anything. And then the other side of it is the Health and Safety at Work Act, and that law that, you know, we've been going through today, that's all around everything health and safety, as well as the coronavirus regulations. And one of the key things I think Paul mentioned earlier in the presentation is if some staff aren't testing for whatever reason, then you need to think, if that is in your risk assessment, then how does that affect your risk assessment, and how can you put other controls in place? Because it's, you know, the employment law side is there, but there's also the, you know, the safety of the business, the other staff and the customers, and it's about getting that balance, and it is very difficult. But yeah, I mean, employment law solicitor will be able to answer that a lot better than any of us would. So hopefully they'll be able to give a lot more on that next week. And also, as Lisa briefly mentioned earlier, we are looking at if we can get some more support in the county for this kind of thing, because we know it's a really key area at the moment. We know it's going to even become kind of even bigger topic once more workplaces go back, and once there's, you know, different reasons people not wearing face coverings, not testing, and, you know, some staff have the vaccine, some haven't. How do you handle that? And, you know, it's all that kind of grey area. So yeah, we are looking at what support we can put on for that. So as Lisa said, watch this space, and do bring that question next week. If you can't attend the webinar next week, then maybe just send an email to the Herts Chamber so we can remember to put your question forward as well. So we have one, if we have a final question that came from Alison. I'm glad you booked on the webinar, that's good. So Alison just said around recommended maximum numbers per table. So a standard table might be 10 people on a 5 feet table. I think this could be linked to social distancing between groups as well. So I don't know, Chris or Paul, you want to have maybe a quick answer on this one so we can wrap up in a few minutes.
So is the question, so that's outside, is it? Not inside, or that's outside, is it? It's six people, 2 households inside, isn't it?
I think, Alison, do you want to, was it to do with inside?
Yeah, it's not for now. Obviously, it's for future when we start doing events face to face again. And I was on a webinar just in the last couple of days where we were talking about maximum numbers that people felt would be good to apply for seated events.
I mean, obviously outside now, I mean, it's the future. Obviously, we're not quite sure what's going to happen, but basically, at the moment, you know, you can have 30 people in a single group booking, and theoretically, they could actually be all sitting together, which is quite incredible, actually, isn't it? But that's the reality. Obviously, inside it is the six people or two households. But again, it's all about how you manage that. And the thing is, it's all very well looking at the large capacities of people outside, but you've got to realise that each group still has to be socially distanced. So another group of 30, you still you still got to make sure that you've got procedures in place for when they kind of are moving around. They're not right next to each other when they're going to visit the toilet and things like that. So it's not about just packing whole kind of areas outside. If it is outside, inside, at the moment, it should be quite well controlled, and it's all about configuration of all the furniture within that setting. Certainly, we would expect in any risk assessment for that business to set maximum numbers, to look at the configuration of furniture inside their area and set maximum numbers. But you have to take into account kind of travel routes, where the toilets are. All these things need to be taken into account. And I can't stress more that it's not just about kind of like the social distancing aspects, but it's all those other measures which we talked about earlier. We call it like a hierarchy of controls. Look at the most important controls and then kind of work backwards. But really, they all need to be applied, because at the end of the day, as I said, you've got minimum standards to do with legislation and even the government guidance. But when it comes to, if we get an outbreak, and it comes to light that people haven't taken all practicable means to actually prevent transmission, then we could be taking further action. So that's our kind of enforcement role. But in terms of advisory, we would just encourage people just to look at their operations in a practical way, to make sure that basically those things are actually implemented. But I think if what you mean is kind of going forward into the future, I mean, we're not sure how that actually is going to operate, to be honest with you, particularly when we have kind of events in the future. I personally don't think it's all going to be a free-for-all, but I could be wrong. Whereas people won't probably be wearing masks, except perhaps on public transport and certain other kind of situations, but certainly in maybe big events or whatever outside, corporate events possibly. I think the mask wearing will go after, maybe after the end of June. But there will still be certain things that are in place, and we actually don't know what they're going to be. Certainly, one of the things I think will be in place will be all the cleaning regimes. And to be honest with you, that's quite good from a point of view of general infection control anyway, especially coming up to Christmas when we get norovirus outbreaks and various other things. But sorry, it's a bit of a convoluted answer, but yeah, so it's not just things, other things as well.
Thanks. Can I just add to that as well? Nathan mentioned it, and I did in the presentation. Each of your premises is going to be unique. The legislation, we don't see the legislation before you when it comes out. We don't see any guidance before you. We find out about these things at the same time. So contacting your local environmental health, your local licensing team, fire safety, get in there early and ask for advice is really important, and try and get that right together, rather than particularly say with the coverings, we've seen lots of people spending thousands of pounds on structures that are not suitable. They've got capacities that are far too large for the exits that are there, and so yeah, we're there to support you through this, rather than although we are regulators, there are tools there for us to regulate. We're there to support you and get you up and running again, rather than sort of wagging that big stick.
Yeah, I think that's a really nice point to end on as well. And yeah, as I said, that is a key message. Get in touch for support. I know Lucy wanted to mention one more thing, but we're kind of just running over, so I don't want to run any more. But if there's anything from the fire aspect, maybe we could send it on with the slides, if that would be okay, if Herts Chamber could forward it on. Or is it something really quick?
Well, it's just about the with social distancing and numbers, and just remembering that those emergency exits and routes are kept clear. People are going to be rearranging tables, and just backing what Paul said about marquees. making sure that you know, it has been relaxed, but making sure they meet the current requirements for fire safety, and they're more prone to arson as well. So something for businesses, you know, we are exactly as Paul said, regulators, but we want to support businesses to get in touch if you want any advice on any of that.
Definitely, thanks. No, really good point as well, because yeah, with all the kind of amends to services, not forgetting the fire exits and things. So yeah, thank you, Lucy. So massive thanks to all of our speakers. Thanks for giving up your time to be here today and answering all questions. Before we close, we just wanted to ask a one question, really quick poll, just to see how you found today's webinar. So I think Sarah's going to get the poll up on your screen. And then I think the results will show up in a minute as well. Just while we're waiting for that, obviously I've talked about the webinar next week on the 20th. We're also going to plan, it's not on the website yet, will be in the next week on the Herts Chamber website. We're going to plan a step 4 from the roadmap recovery. As Chris was saying, we don't know too much about what businesses are going to have to do beyond 21st of June yet. You know, as we find out more, that's what that webinar will cover. But if there's anything specific, that'll be the last webinar in the series. If there's anything you want us to cover in that, anything at all, doesn't have to be about step 4, anything to do with local authority regulation or support for businesses, then please do let us know, and you can send any suggestions into the Herts Chamber email. We will follow up and ask people for any thoughts as well, but just, you know, in the meantime, if anyone has anything they'd really like to be included in the webinar, then we'd really like to hear your ideas. Can we see the results of the poll?
Sorry, it doesn't seem to be working, Lauren.
It's come up on my screen. I think I can see it. I don't know if anyone else can. Yeah, okay, so not bad. So half a lot more and half yes somewhat. So everyone's learned something, which is definitely what we want. For anyone that felt they learned something but actually there's more they need to know, or they're still confused about anything, that, as we said, do get in touch, because we can't cover everything, but you have got the experts there on hand to help you. So thanks everyone for attending, and hopefully see some of you at the next one.
Thanks,
Good evening everyone.